everybody. Hi, I'm Becky. Can't stand there. I'm going to stand a little bit this way. If I talk at this volume, is everybody okay in the back? Good, awesome. I'm Becky. I'm going to talk about making the jump from design to product management. First of all, thanks so much for having me, and thanks for coming to my talk. I flew 8 hours and spent 5 hours on a train to get here, so I feel really honored to have been invited to speak. I'll jump right into it. I'm going to throw a bunch of stuff at you and leave plenty of time at the end for questions, so please think of questions to ask. That's my favorite part. So I'm a product manager, and I have a background in design. That's somewhat uncommon, though it is becoming more common. And I get a lot of questions about what that's like. For me, it's been a very rewarding step. So today I'll talk a bit about how I made the switch, the similarities and different. It's going to keep doing this, by the way. It's been doing this for the last 20 minutes. It'll come back. I don't really seem to have any control over it. But that's okay. My slides are more for me than they are for you. There's not a lot of content on this. So I'm going to talk about making the switch, similarities and differences between design and product management, and some tips for those of you who may be looking to make the switch yourself. So, searching, cool. I'm going to try and reset this. All right. So as is often the case with career transitions, a major contributor was circumstance for me. I had been assigned to work with a team that I wound up really enjoying working with, but I wasn't officially a part of their org chart. See, it's got a mind of its own. And I was looking for a way to make my position on that team more certain. Rather than being just on loan, I wanted to be a permanent member of that team. So one afternoon, several coworkers were standing around talking, and I overheard our director say that he had gotten approval to hire a second product manager. Since I was curious about my opportunities to join the team officially, I popped my head into the conversation and was like, hey, what if I applied for that role? I was maybe 40% serious when I said that, but no one made any horrified faces. So I figured, hey, let's really consider this. So I started asking my colleagues for feedback on how they thought that I would do as a product manager. These were the people that I was going to be working with, and it was important to me that they felt like I could do that role well. So I asked for honest feedback, and what I heard was encouraging. I knew I had a lot to learn, but some of the aspects of product management I did already have a good grasp on as a designer. How to manage a backlog, how to conduct user research particularly, and how to balance the details of execution with strategic vision. So once I started weighing the opportunity seriously, I began to see more benefits to me making the switch. Not just staying on that team, but also it was an opportunity for me to grow as in my career. So being a PM would give me a chance to learn new things and to take on new responsibilities and contribute to the team's work in a new and different way than I had previously. I also saw it as an opportunity to fight for great user experience. So a lot of the decisions that are made by product managers have a huge impact on user experience. And I figured I could bring my user-centered design experience into that role and champion that at a higher level. So before I made the official role switch, I had the opportunity to do a bit of both jobs on a really quick product that my team worked on. I was the product designer on an Apple Watch app called Q. But because the product manager was new in their role, I had the opportunity to teach them. They needed someone to teach them about managing software delivery. That person came from marketing. They didn't have much experience working directly with a delivery team, but I did as a designer. So this gave me the chance to do some aspects of product design and product management without having the full responsibility of being the sole product manager. So that app, which was designed and built in just 5 weeks, there it is. It was featured in the App Store, and it was listed among MacLife's top 25 watch apps during launch week. And there were only 4 people on that team. There was the PM, there was myself on design, and just one software engineering pair. My team does Lean XP, so we do paired programming. And yeah, so this app was a huge success. We launched it on the day the watch was launched, and we really couldn't have done that without something that we call Balanced Team. Has anybody heard of Balanced Team as a concept? Awesome. Well, I'm going to cover it really briefly here, but check out more at balancedteam.org. There's also some meetups that happen around the world. Balanced Team is a set of principles that helps agile teams work well together. The concept was originally conceived around 2009. A group of interdisciplinary practitioners got together and tried to come up with ways for agile teams to work in a more balanced fashion. And Balanced Team provides a working framework. It's not like Scrum. There's not a ton of rules for Balanced Team. It's more about principles. And it enhances cross-disciplinary collaboration and fosters a sense of shared ownership. Thank you. This diagram is used to represent Balanced Team. Balanced Team is comprised of just 3 roles: software engineering, product design, product management. Each role has a seat. Hope you got your pictures quick. Each role has an equal seat at the table and a particular responsibility to the team. So it's represented as the blades of a fan because each role on the team works in a balanced fashion to propel the product forward, with the product at the center. So let me explain each role just a little bit. Designers on a Balanced Team are the champions of empathy. So they have the deepest understanding of the customer. They translate the needs of those customers into products that we can actually build, and they hone the craft of design. When push comes to shove, the designer fights for the user. They bring the user's perspective into the conversations that the team is having about what to do next, and they call the team out when we're prioritizing work that does not have user value. They keep us honest about how what we're doing matches up with what real users need. Software engineers on a Balanced Team are technical experts. They champion the most effective technical solutions for the problem the team is trying to solve, and they're committed to delivery and quality. Engineers on a Balanced Team don't just hand over estimates and do what they're told. They understand that there's a variety of implementation choices, right? And they champion the best one for the product at that time. And then product managers. We call this the scales of justice. Product managers weigh all the inputs from stakeholders, users, the engineering team, the designers, and what's going on in the market, and balance all of those things to inform decisions. So those decisions are often made despite a lack of evidence and in the face of conflicting priorities, and this actually reminds me a lot of Garrett's keynote this morning. We use our intuition sometimes, right? But the point is that the decision gets made because until you've made a decision, you can't know if it's the right one or not. So then all the members of a Balanced Team are responsible for just that, maintaining balance. If an engineer sees the team skewing too far towards business outcomes and delivery speed, thus creating technical debt, they're expected to speak up. If the designer sees the business driving a feature that doesn't have user value or may have a negative impact on the user experience, they're expected to speak up. It's equally the responsibility of every team member, regardless of their role, to seek balance between the needs of users, the technology, and the business. So this philosophy makes it possible for teams to collaborate in a way that I've never experienced elsewhere. I found it to be really effective, and it certainly allowed me the space to learn a bit about product management before moving into that role and eventually make that transition successfully. So, thanks to working on that watch app that I mentioned, and the benefits of working closely with other PMs as a member of a Balanced Team, I felt like I had a pretty good understanding of this role before I officially moved. So, not long after that watch app wrapped, I interviewed for and I landed the PM role. And then during my first few months in the new role, I had the benefit of pairing with a consulting agency, Pivotal Labs, to learn about being a PM from them. And then I moved on to pairing with other PMs from within our company. So I do that to this day. I'm sort of an internal consultant. I am the expert in agile software delivery, and the PMs that I pair with are experts in the business. So we're teaching each other things in both directions as we work together. So I owe much of what I've learned over the past several years to this concept of pairing and close collaboration with teammates in general. So if you are a designer thinking that this sounds like a step that you'd like to take, design is a fantastic background for a product manager. There are several ways that my background has served me very well. So let's talk about some strengths of designers moving into product management. I am hyper-focused on the user. I am always questioning our business goals to make sure that they align with some real user value. I don't kid myself that we can convince a customer to do something our way instead of their way. And I believe that software products are only successful if they actually deliver real user value. You're fine. It's always an adventure. You're fine. I'm just going to be entirely distracted until you're done, so I'm going to let you do your thing. You're fine. There it is. User obsession. Yes, I believe that for software products, there's a solution that solves the user's problem, and that's where our business value lies. If we're not solving a real user problem, then why are we spending the money? But that's a whole other topic. So having design training also means that I have a higher threshold for quality when I'm accepting user stories. I pay attention to the details. I'm not just checking functionality and does this match the acceptance criteria. I can also catch some of those high fidelity visual misses that often happen when we're trying to go fast. I also know what I'm giving up if I forego certain design enhancements. So it's an educated decision to deprioritize a visual enhancement, and I know whether or not we need to come back to it later. So product managers have to understand trade-offs, right? And formal training in design really helps us understand what those trade-offs are when we're talking about the user experience. For many teams, design is an afterthought. I understand that many teams don't have funding for full-time design, or they don't have the right leadership who really believes in having full-time design. So we're all operating under constraints. On the other hand, most organizations have a product manager or something similar, right? It's funny how people think that you can go without design, but you can't go without product management. But if you can't get a full-time designer on staff, having a product manager who understands design and has a design background can help temporarily fill that gap and create a champion for design moving forward. So if the product manager is saying this should really be a role, that's just another voice saying that we need designers on this team. So design educators emphasize the problem-solving aspect of design in an effort to provide students with a solid foundation that helps them with whatever kind of work might come their way. I learned more than just how to make things pretty in school. I learned that every design challenge is a communication challenge. So I found that my natural tendency to ask why and to do research has been a great asset as a product manager. It helps me understand where the business value intersects with user value and helps me focus on solving problems, not just delivering solutions. Being a great designer also requires practicing active empathy. We are solving problems for people who are not like us or are dealing with situations that we don't have to face. The empathy that I built as a designer has served me in a new capacity as a product manager. It helps me seek out and understand others' perspectives so that I can generate consensus and a shared vision. This is really important because product managers don't really get anything done without the participation of others. So using my empathy to understand diverse perspectives helps me build that consensus. So, there are a few things to watch out for if you're a designer moving into product management. Micromanaging design. There's a natural tendency to focus too much on design when that's the background that you come from. Product management is its own job. It's not the senior designer role. It's not design management. Don't get too involved in the daily details. At best, you'll stifle the creativity of the design team, and at worst, you'll make enemies, and you'll end up arguing with each other about like what color the footer should be, which is just not valuable use of your time. And focusing too much on design also overlooks key parts of your product manager role. So if you're doing design stuff, who's doing the product stuff? So make sure you're not hanging on to old responsibilities. On the other hand, don't be so afraid of participating in design that you create a little design satellite over here that you never really talk to. This is one that was a bit of a struggle for me because I was so worried about stepping on their toes that I overcorrected in the other direction and left them alone. And so they didn't have insight into the vision and the goals of our product in a way that I would have if I had not been trying to let them do their own thing so much. Overlap across roles on an Agile team is a good thing, right? So don't think that overlap means that you're not being a good PM. If you're concerned about striking the right balance, just say so. Be upfront with your team, be transparent, and try to come up with a process that works for your specific team and the skill sets that you have. Don't be scared of the tech. So while I may never sit down at the keyboard and write code or deliver a story, it's important to invest in understanding the tech side of things. Especially so for PMs coming through design. You probably weren't exposed to this in school. Even if you have the most amazing engineers, you can't understand the trade-offs you're making without really understanding the tech. If you need to develop your skills in this area, ask engineers to give you explanations of key topics. So a couple of years ago, my company got really hyped on the concept of APIs as though they were magical unicorns that could solve all of our problems. And I was like, I know that stands for Application Programming Interface, but what does that really mean? So I pulled aside an engineer and was like, hey, can you give me like the For Dummies version of an API? And he spent like 30 minutes at a whiteboard talking about the history of APIs, what they can do, what they can't do, and why everybody was suddenly so hyped on them, which really helped me go into those conversations about, oh, let's build an API with a lot more confidence. Last but not least, don't let stakeholders walk all over you. One of the most important skills that I had to develop as a product manager was managing the business side of things. Product management requires a great deal of diplomacy and a fair bit of politics. Just because a stakeholder asks for something doesn't mean it's a good thing for your product. But as a former designer, I had a tendency to acquiesce to just about any request because I felt like, oh, these people must know better. They're from the business. But as I grew more confident, I learned when to say yes and when to say no and when to just kind of not respond at all, depending on what's best for the product at the time. And as the product manager, you know better what's best for your product than anyone outside of your product team, no matter how senior they are. So, if you have a design background, obviously there's a lot of overlap between design and product management. Designers can be your greatest allies or your worst enemies, depending on how you manage this overlap. So there's a few areas where product and design work particularly well together, and I'd say focus on these areas to start. Research and usability testing is the obvious one, right? These meaningfully impact the direction of the product. So the best research plans are the ones that are developed in collaboration between product and design. I try to reserve an hour a few days before our tests. We do a weekly user research or usability testing session on our team. But whatever your cadence is, plan a few days beforehand to collaborate on your script, on your test plan. We start out by discussing what do we want to learn this week before we even start on the script. What are we trying to get out of this session? And then we'll talk about what methods help us get at those learnings. And then once those goals and methods are squared away, we'll do a draft of our script for the test. And then I let design run with it from there to work out the details, because they run the tests on our teams. And then right before we go into testing, just a final check-in for feedback, making sure we've got everything buttoned up. Another good opportunity to collaborate with design is on stakeholder interviews. So in stakeholder interviews, product managers have a tendency to make it a sales pitch, or to just promise to put things in the backlog to keep people happy. Because designers are a step removed from business stakeholders, they can be a good sanity check for whether or not you should incorporate stakeholder feedback into the backlog, and in what way. I lead stakeholder interviews, but I'll send the designers my interview script to get a second pair of eyes on it. And then I'll include them in the interviews so they can hear what stakeholders are saying. And then after the sessions, I synthesize with the design team so that I can get another perspective. Qualitative and quantitative data go hand in hand. Product managers tend to favor analytics and hard numbers, while designers are passionate about user research. So by working together to gather data and understand how it fits together, you can deepen your understanding of user needs and behaviors. Use analytics to identify what is happening with your product and what actual user behaviors are in aggregate, and then based on those patterns, schedule user research to get a qualitative understanding of why people are using your software the way that they are. This is a great opportunity to bring in engineering as well, because they often have ideas of analytics or telemetry that others may not think of, and they really understand what's easy to implement and what's more difficult. I've been very surprised at how easy it was to implement really hardcore analytics that I thought would be really difficult, because I just asked an engineer about it. They're like, oh, that's super easy. And then when I'm doing story acceptance, I often tap a designer on the shoulder to get a second pair of eyes, especially for things that have a high degree of user interface changes. I'm usually looking for functionality, value, acceptance criteria, are we hitting the big points? But designers are focused on the details. And even though I have a background there, just another perspective is good. These kinds of things are a lot easier to catch before you accept the story the first time, because we all know that if the design details get missed in the first pass, they're probably not getting prioritized later. So, solve them first. So, if the design and product relationship is so important, how do you keep it healthy? Story sketching. I have this way that I approach stories that I think give space for designers to do their job, and for me to do my job effectively. So begin a new feature by writing out the goal portion of the story only. So I've got a little example here. I want to register for a 5K so that I have a goal to work toward. I don't fill out the acceptance criteria yet, because that's going to be informed by design. So I'll have a few stories queued up this way, and then take some time to talk through the stories with design. We might do some whiteboard sketching about how we both think the story should be implemented, and we'll bounce ideas back and forth. And then let design work on the stories for a while, and then once they have something that they feel good about, come back together and discuss. So ultimately, you'll end up with well thought out stories that have all of the details considered. And an additional benefit of collaborating on stories this way is you'll think of more edge cases and error states, and your engineers will thank you for not bringing that stuff up in the estimation phase at the last minute. Another way to make sure you have a good relationship with design is having clear goals for your product. This is just good practice anyway, but it really helps you balance with design. When you find yourself in conflict with anyone on the team, refer back to your goals. Often conflicts are due to a misunderstanding of the goals, or sometimes the team has just naturally drifted away from the goals without realizing it. So realigning on your shared vision can solve a lot of disagreements rather than arguing about opinions. Even better, revisiting the goals often leads the team to additional solutions that you hadn't thought of previously, and those are often the truly great solutions. Prioritization is key. But communicating the rationale behind that prioritization is especially important when you're dealing with design. If you need to defer a design enhancement and you have a good reason, then explain yourself and make sure you understand why that enhancement matters to the design team. Allow time for that conversation to happen and allow your colleagues to change your mind if it makes sense. Do not erode the trust between you and your designers. If you move a design enhancement down in the backlog and say, oh, we'll get to it later, you had better get to it later, period. So, there's a lot of overlap between design and product management. Seems like, oh, well, these are very similar. What is actually the difference between these two roles? So some things you want to learn about product management, the places that you're going to have to grow your skill set if you're a designer. Understanding the business, first and foremost. You have to know what makes your company money and where your product fits into that landscape. You'll also need to understand the operations of your business and how your product fits into those processes. A lot of times, the way that a feature shows up in a product is directly tied back to some back office business process, and those two things affect one another. You can't just change things without realizing the impacts. Your product may require training, compliance review, government approvals, privacy controls, marketing, sales, it goes on, and you have to understand who all those teams are and how you have to interface with them to deliver your product. You'll also need to keep an eye on the competitive landscape that your product lives in, both externally and within your own company. If you work in a very large enterprise, like I do, you could have 3 or 4 competing products that do a similar thing within your own company. Prioritization is the bulk of a product manager's job. At the roadmap level, you'll have to plan around unmovable markers like software, system upgrades, industry sales cycles. There's also the out of left field stuff like roadblocks like new government regulations or stakeholder whims. On a more tactical level, you have to keep the backlog moving forward and prioritized as well. While designers should be aware of the overall priority, as a product manager, your job is to manage it at all levels. And if you're not doing this, you are not doing the job. I think just him coming and fiddling with that fixed the problem. Seems to have been fine since then. So, another thing that's important to learn as a product manager is managing scope. Managing the scope of your product, not just in an iteration, right, but the product as a whole, keeps it from becoming a Franken product of just, oh, everybody's ideas all glommed together in this kitchen sink app that is really confusing for people. Ideally, you'd be approaching your product and even features within that product by trying to define the minimum viable product or minimum viable feature rather than trying to cram in all the bells and whistles. And getting the scope right is an art, and it is a key piece of the product manager's job. You have to know the vision for what your product is and what it is not. Speaking of vision, product managers have to be salespeople. I spend a lot of time helping people understand what our product does and what it doesn't do, as well as what we have planned for the future. Communication is just as much about managing other people's expectations as it is about announcing all of the amazing things that you've delivered. And ultimately, product management is about managing the investment. Your company is spending money and time to build this product. That investment is being made in dollars, time, other resources. For every resource invested in your product, something is not being done. So product management is about making sure that those resources are being used to deliver as much value as possible. What your product becomes is as much defined by the things that you choose not to do as the things that you choose to do. So if you think you'd like to make this transition yourself, there are ways to set yourself up for success. Find a collaborative team. Often we have to do a job before we're given the title that goes with it. So that was the case for me, and I've seen it happen time and again with my team. People grow into a role and start doing that role, and then about 6 months later they get the actual job title and the compensation that goes with it. So get yourself on a team that gives you opportunities to learn. It's a lot harder to get somebody to give you a job that you've never done before than to find a team that gives you an opportunity to be exposed to that job and collaborate with people who are doing that job already. Pair with your PM. I'm a strong supporter of pairing in all disciplines. If you're not able to work together organically, ask the product manager that you work with to set up time specifically for the two of you to pair on things. Ideally, you'd be able to jump together whenever, but not every team is like that, and if time is hard to come by, just a couple of hours a week can go a long way. This will benefit not just your career, but the product as well. And if you can maybe teach some things about design to the product manager, then all the better. Get a mentor, formal or informal, identifying someone who has the skills that you want to learn, and then working to learn from them is helping you formalize your path. Learn the business. So pay attention in stakeholder meetings. If you're not invited to them, ask to be included. You don't even have to talk. Sometimes if I want to hear that a conversation is happening, that people are wary that I'm going to be loud and obnoxious or ask a really dumb question, I'll say, I won't even say anything. I'll stay on mute the whole time, I promise. But just hearing those conversations that happen at the stakeholder level will teach you a lot about the different perspectives that product managers are bringing to the job. And be a student. So get out in the world and attend conferences. Clearly you all are doing a great job of this already, but never assume that you've learned everything, right? Because we haven't. And here are a few books I recommend. Always try to give some takeaways. Probably familiar to many of you. Lean Startup. It's a specific way of developing products, but it's a great introduction to the business side of things. Planning Extreme Programming. Yeah, it's just one way of doing programming, but it's a really fun book to read. And gave me really good insight to some of the concerns that software engineers have without having to go through like a whole semester of courses on software engineering. And then Leaders Eat Last is not specifically about software, but it will help you learn how to build relationships and lead without authority. Product management is a lot of leadership without authority, and using some of the techniques that he talks about in Leaders Eat Last has helped me a lot. And last but not least, ask for feedback. So as you're looking to make any kind of career transition, find people that you trust to be honest and ask them for feedback. Take what they say openly. Don't defend or react to the feedback. You're welcome to disagree with feedback that people give you, but it's bad form to start an argument about it. And then be prepared to give them feedback in return. So transitioning into product management was very rewarding for me. If you want to grow into this role, I encourage you to make the transition. The journey from design to product is a lot like managing a product. Managing your career is very similar. So set a goal, make your goal clear and achievable, and make it inspiring. Make it something that makes you want to get up in the morning. Make a plan to get there. So identify learning opportunities and steps that you can take to achieve your goal. Make a plan. Stay curious. So approach the process with genuine curiosity. Allow yourself to be surprised and investigate new things. There it goes again. Ask lots of questions. And last but not least, practice continuous improvement with yourself, not just with the software you work on. Purposefully evaluate your own progress and identify things that you're doing well in addition to things that you'd like to do better. Thank you.